In my opinion, the best way to understand fibromyalgia is to think of it as a broken stress response system, one that is stuck in the on position. Or said another way, our sympathetic nervous system is chronically activated. And living in a constant state of fight or flight really wreaks havoc on the body, preventing deep sleep, keeping muscles tense and painful, impairing digestion and energy production, and throwing hormones out of balance. Because the ability to sense and respond to danger is so essential for survival, the stress response involves almost every body system. And what's happening in the body with fibromyalgia is like a chain reaction that starts with the brain stuck in the sympathetic mode. That leads to impaired sleep, tightened muscles, impaired digestion. All of this activates the immune system, and in combination kind of ultimately pushes the central nervous system into a state of hypersensitivity, where we see faulty pain volume control. And this is what you might have heard called central sensitization, or more recently it's been renamed as nociplastic pain. This chain reaction concept is just my hypothesis, my way of connecting the dots, so to speak. But each of these dots has plenty of supporting evidence that I share with you in my writings and videos. It is my intention and hope with this library that I can help maybe fast forward fibromyalgia science by creating and leaving a trail of breadcrumbs. I hope to at least generate some better questions for scientists to work on, because we definitely don't need any more studies about exercise and fibromyalgia. Don't get me wrong, I really appreciate any research interest, and anybody researching fibromyalgia, I do appreciate, but I really feel like the question of does exercise help in fibromyalgia has solidly been answered, and it's time to start looking at some new questions. In fact, the definition of hypothesis is a proposed explanation that's made on the basis of limited evidence as a starting point for further investigation. And here's the key area where I think science has really missed the mark with fibromyalgia. I think the reason why our muscles hurt is related to the fascia, the connective tissue that surrounds and penetrates the muscle. In the past 25 years or so, science has really gotten hung up on just looking at the central nervous system as kind of to blame for all of fibromyalgia pain. And it certainly is playing a role, and definitely it's important, but it actually doesn't really explain why it's our muscles specifically that hurt. And I think it's really more that the central sensitization, that pain volume control issue, is almost like an end result of that chain reaction that I think starts much earlier and really involves heavily the connective tissue in our muscles. Interestingly, this is not a new idea, actually. Almost 200 years ago, in 1827, a British physician said that fibromyalgia, then called rheumatism, he described it as pain of a peculiar kind affecting the white fibrous tissues belonging to muscles and joints. Dr. Scudamore actually went on to write a whole book about it, and in that book he gives one of the first, and I think still pretty accurate, descriptions of fibromyalgia. He described it as something that primarily affects middle-aged women. It's characterized by periodic flares and wandering pains, pain that is aggravated by motion, and where tenderness is felt from pressure on the muscles. So why do most scientists feel that fibromyalgia is primarily a central nervous system problem? Over the 200 years since Scudamore wrote his book, the muscles in fibromyalgia have been examined pretty thoroughly. And because there has not been any convincing or consistent evidence of problems in the muscle, even though the name of the illness literally means pain in the fibrous tissue around muscles, all problems have really been attributed to the central nervous system. And that's partly true. It's definitely playing a role, but it's not the only player. And there are some few scattered studies that have shown some muscle abnormalities, and I go into those in more depth at the Fibromyalgia Research Library. But I feel like the biggest reason we've kind of missed it here is that we've actually been looking at the wrong part of the muscle. We've really been looking more at the muscle cells and not the connective tissue that surrounds and kind of glues them together. So muscles are made up of two different tissues, and this is why we talk about myofascial pain. So myo means muscle, fascial means connective tissue. So the muscle is made up of these long springs that are the muscle fibers, and the movement of those springs is what helps us move our muscles. It's what is helping me move my hands right now. But those springs are kind of contained and organized and glued together in this honeycomb of connective tissue, which is the fascia. And for a long time, this connective tissue was really thought to be pretty unimportant. It was really just thought to be sort of like irrelevant, and all the activity, both good and bad, was attributed to the muscle fiber component. So when we're looking at the muscle biopsies, all the assessment that people have done over these 200 years, looking at the fibromyalgia muscles, for the most part, they've just been looking at the springs. And the springs are actually normal. But the honeycomb, the connective tissue that surrounds it, is not normal. Another way to think about this is, do you remember in like middle school art class where, you could see the little diagram here where, do you look at that and see the black vase, or do you see two faces in profile in the white space? One is the positive space and the other is the negative space. And I think our brain tends to get really drawn by the positive space, like the muscle. We tend to disregard in general, and also I think scientifically, the more negative space, the surrounding area. And that I think is actually where the problem is in fibromyalgia. So you have a kind of terrible combination of a typically dismissed or disregarded illness with an ignored tissue in a condition that mostly affects women, and you can see why things have been really neglected. I think maybe the muscle biopsies in the past weren't actually looking at the right part of the muscle. They needed to be looking at the fascia instead. And I think when you look at this diagram here, the honeycomb on the left there, what they've done is they've dissolved the muscle fibers, the springs from the muscle, and all that's left is this felt-like honeycomb structure. And that, I think, is where the problem is. And there are some studies, although not well known, but I'm going to share them with you now, that have shown some problems in that part of the fibromyalgia muscle. So I'm going to review the two muscle biopsy studies that I think are really important in fibromyalgia, and they both showed problems, inflammation, and excess collagen in the fascia surrounding the muscles. But first, I just want to orient you to the anatomy of what we're looking at here. So this image is a cross-section, not from the study I'm referencing, but just so you can see where the pink part here is the muscle cells, and then it's surrounded by these layers of honeycomb. The innermost layer there is called the endomysium, and then this whole chunk of muscle is surrounded by what's called the paramysium. And this whole honeycomb network is made up of a couple things. It's made up of collagen, it's made up of immune cells, and it is rich in pain-sensing nerves. In fact, most of the nerves that innervate the muscles, which basically mean send signals from the muscle to the brain as far as pain signals, almost all of those pain sensing nerves, they don't actually connect with the springs, the muscle fibers or muscle cells. They really reside more in the surrounding honeycomb. And you could see if there's some excess inflammation or collagen deposition there, that if you're having an issue in the part of the muscle where the pain sensing nerves are, that you're probably likely to maybe generate pain. So in the first biopsy study I'm going to talk about, they basically did cross sections like this, and they stained them for different ingredients, different things to see, like how much collagen there was, immune cells. And what they found was a slight but significant increase in collagen surrounding the muscle cells of the fibromyalgia patients. And this is really important because collagen it's like a double-edged sword. So collagen is part of the body's natural injury healing response. If you cut your skin, and what helps create the scar tissue is your body laying down new collagen. But then once that repair process is done, the immune system comes in normally and clears out all the excess collagen, and then the tissue is back to normal. And what we see in fibromyalgia is muscles that have this kind of constant micro injury, micro trauma from the tension that's generated by the sympathetic nervous system saying, like, we got to fight or flee. And our muscles are not meant to live in that level of tension. So as just kind of normal daily movements happen, we're very subtly injuring our muscles. And so the body says, well, we better put some collagen there and maybe bring some immune cells in because we got to fix this. But then because of the sympathetic nervous system, how it influences and impacts the immune system, the sympathetic nervous system then says, no, immune cells do not come in and clean up the collagen because we are still in danger mode. And this is where you can see where you'd get this even just small amounts of buildup of collagen and buildup of chemicals of the immune system and immune cells. You could see how that could generate problems. So this second image here, this is from the study I'm talking about. And by the way, all the references you can find at the Fibromyalgia Research Library. Definitely check it out yourself. So in this, we're looking at cross-section of the muscles. But here, the muscle part, the muscle fibers, the springs, are stained more the blue-green. And then the collagen in the fascia around, the honeycomb around the muscles, is stained with a pink reddish tone. And on the top row are 3 fibromyalgia muscle biopsies, and on the bottom row are 3 biopsies from healthy people's muscles. And they did the same thing, so they stained them both for collagen and immune cells. And what they found was in the fibromyalgia muscles, there was pretty consistent increased amounts of collagen, increased amounts of immune chemicals, increased amounts of immune cells, increased signs of tissue damage and oxidative stress. And if you look here, you can see the arrows don't show up super well, but on the top row there, you can really see, like on the A to B comparison, A there, you see a lot of really pink red tissue, pink red collagen stained in the fascia, the honeycomb. Compared to down here, you see like little hints of it in the healthy muscle. And over here between E and F, you also see a big comparison where, there's some in F in the healthy control, there's some collagen, but there's a lot more in the fibromyalgia muscles. And this is problematic. So I also realized and kind of came to my chain reaction hypothesis, not just from muscle biopsy studies, but really from my own personal experience with pain relief that was from a treatment that was directed specifically at my fascia. So when I developed fibromyalgia in medical school for 2 years, nothing helped. I tried everything, chiropractic and acupuncture and all sorts of different massage techniques and exercise and various medications and herbs. And I tried it all, and really nothing was helping. And I kind of thought my career and maybe life really kind of felt over, like I was just done. And I stumbled into trying myofascial release, and immediately after my first session, that burning pain in my neck eased up for the first time in 2 years. And I was hooked. The more myofascial release I did, the better I felt. And it remains a huge part of how I care for myself today and how I care for patients. What's really important about myofascial release, though, is it specifically targets the connective tissue, the fascia part of the muscle. Swedish massage, or what you think of as kind of typical massage with, rubbing motions or, even like an elbow, that actually really works on more the muscle fibers, the spring component of the muscle. It doesn't actually do much for the fascia because collagen doesn't respond to that. Actually, what collagen responds to, what this felt like mesh network responds to, is really slow, prolonged stretching. So I really was like, okay, there's something here. And part of me really wanted to be a research scientist. And in fact, early in my career, I led a small study that compared the two different techniques, Swedish massage to myofascial release for fibromyalgia. Certainly, it was a tiny little pilot study, and there weren't enough participants for us to really say, yes, there's a huge difference between the two different techniques. But there was definitely a trend, meaning the people getting myofascial release tended to get more pain relief than those doing the Swedish massage. And then, thankfully, even though I wasn't able to really persist and have a research career, lots of people started looking at myofascial release for fibromyalgia, particularly in Europe. And they found over 6 different studies, total of almost 300 participants, a large effect of myofascial release on fibromyalgia pain. I promise not to bore you too much with medical mumbo jumbo, but I do want to give just a tiny little bit more of kind of the scientific background that supports my chain reaction theory of fibromyalgia. And I was delighted in 2023, a medical journal published an editorial that I wrote that really laid out my scientific argument as to why I think that the fibromyalgia chain reaction kind of starts with sympathetic nervous system hyperactivity, kind of on the left here in the red, and ultimately ends in fatigue, brain fog, muscle pain, and at the bottom there in the black circle, central sensitization. In this editorial, I really laid out my theory that things start with the sympathetic nervous system being hyperactive. That leads to sleep disturbance, pathological levels of muscle tension, and very importantly, immune system dysregulation. A huge part of my theory, my argument, was related to a really interesting study that came out in summer of 2021. It was pretty mind-blowing, actually, but because it happened in a time where the world was really distracted by, other things happening medically in the world, like the COVID pandemic, it kind of didn't make as much buzz as I think it should have. And what they did basically is they took healthy controls, people with fibromyalgia, drew blood from them, extracted from the blood antibodies, and then inserted those antibodies into healthy mice. So the mice that received healthy people's antibodies, nothing happened. Those that received the fibromyalgia antibodies developed signs of fibromyalgia. They developed the central sensitization, They walked around their cage less, so they developed fatigue, and they actually had more tender muscles. When you pressed on them, they jerked away. It took a lot less pressure when you pressed on them for them to jerk away than it did with mice that had not received those antibodies. So it really starts to kind of show you like, okay, the immune system must be involved. And it almost implied an autoimmune aspect to the condition. I think the jury is still out on that, but I think we can definitely say there is no doubt that the immune system is intimately involved in fibromyalgia pain. It's not clear yet whether it meets true criteria for autoimmune disease. But I think that what we're seeing here is a sympathetic nervous system that's hyperactive, that essentially gives us tight muscles that then have this low-grade inflammation, this low-grade myofascial inflammation that results both in pain, but also we're generating all of these antigens, which are basically what antibodies, it's like the key that activates the antibody lock. So when you have keys floating around and then the antibodies, they find their matching partner and bind, and then that forms what's called an immune complex. And those immune complexes are particularly good at activating the central nervous system to become hypersensitive, like in fibromyalgia. Sounds familiar, right? So I think that this is huge, and there's actually been some more work since that 2021 article, and since mine came out in 2023. There's been studies looking at other elements of the immune response that also are abnormal in fibromyalgia and also give mice fibromyalgia. So other players, things like neutrophils and mast cells, also play a really big role in generating the inflammation and the pain in fibromyalgia. So to sum up, if you're going to concoct a recipe to create fibromyalgia pain, you'd need 3 ingredients. You'd need sympathetic nervous system hyperactivity. You'd need an immune system that has a bias towards attacking itself, so sort of an autoimmune bias. Myofascial tension. And I think if you mix those 3 together for long enough, you'd ultimately reach central sensitization where even light touch is painful. If my hypothesis is correct and things are really stemming from that constant activation of the stress response, that sympathetic nervous system that's in overdrive, if I'm correct, then we could actually, if we could find a way to sort of reset the hypothalamus and the parts of the brain that are really driving that stress response, if we could reset those back to, factory settings, I think that we would kind of have a cure, a silver bullet for fibromyalgia, which, believe me, I am very much hoping we will get to. We haven't discovered that yet, and what I have found is that clinically the key to fibromyalgia treatment is to really lessen all of the downstream problems that are caused by that sympathetic nervous system activation. You can find more specific guidance for yourself and your doctor in my book, The FibroManual. And you can find more information and all the scientific references for the studies I talked about today at fibroresearch.org, which is the home of the Fibromyalgia Research Library.